Welcome to SF Commercial Property Conversations with Bruce Bean, where Bay Area investments meet expert insights. Get ready to unlock the strategies of commercial real estate success.
Today we have Rich Enderlin with us, and Rich and I have an interesting commonality in that we both went to high school in Boulder, Colorado. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and Rich went to school in Boulder, Colorado, but there was a lot of other things happening there. So, Rich, it'd be great to hear the history here and how we kind of came together in Boulder.
Oh, sure. So I'm actually originally a native New Yorker. And when I was a teenager, mom and dad decided they had had enough of the New York City rat race. And mom worked for IBM. And we moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1977. I was a freshman in high school and then ended up going to Fairview High School, your rival. And spent 4 years in Boulder and just made some great friends and love it. My mom, who's now 91 years old, still lives in Erie, Colorado with my older sister.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, my brother still lives in Erie. That's interesting.
So we have even more in common.
Wow, 91. Yeah, we're going back, actually, a side note here. We're going back, my business partner in the 70s, his wife is going to turn 100 next month in January. So we'll be back in Boulder for that event.
That's
but
amazing.
Anyway, so you got from New York to Boulder and then back to New York City to go to college.
Well, I first went out to California for a few years and just did a lot of skirt chasing rather than go to school. And eventually went back to my native New York to go to Pace University, where I finished up. And then I came back out to California in the early 90s, and I've been out here ever since.
So did your mom work for IBM through that whole thing?
Yep. She worked there in the 70s, right up to the early 80s. And I think she took an early retirement.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, at that time, the plant in Boulder, Colorado was the hot spot. I mean, it was a big deal. They came into Boulder, they built this gigantic plant. And of course, early on, IBM was the hotshot computer maker. And then things kind of all changed. But yeah, anyway, that was a fun time. Yeah. So, okay, so then you get back to Pasadena, you start working in property management.
Right. I started in the property management side of things. And a quick story is this is back in the 90s when we had the, stay alive until you're 95. And we had the whole, all these REOs were hitting the market and the government had the RTC, if you remember that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was managing 50, 60 properties at once. It was just a crazy time. And I remember I was like a little 10-unit apartment building, and I met the seller there, and a broker was supposed to be there, and he was late, and the seller was all upset. And he said to me, and this guy's going to make $60,000 on this deal. And I went, what? I don't make $60,000 in a year. And he said, you should be a broker. And then I decided, you know what, maybe I ought to look into this. And a couple of years later, I transitioned into the brokerage side of the house.
And then $60,000 kind of started coming in the door.
Well, first year, as always, most first-year brokers, you don't make anything. And then the second year, you start to build your business, you book a business. And I had a great second year. I made over like $140,000 my second year, and it just kept going up from there.
Yeah. No, that was a fun time, the 90s to 2000. And then 2004, the dot-com bust hit. But, the ups and downs of the market are all there. But then you started actually building a much bigger operation.
Right. So eventually I made the foolish decision to want to become a broker owner as opposed to just a high-producing broker. So I ended up building a company called BRC Advisors in Los Angeles. We grew that to 5 offices, 160 brokers. We're ranked number 16th, I think, at one point. So we weren't quite up there with the big boys, but we were very formidable in the number 2 market in the country. But we realized that we needed a national platform at the time because technology had come to the point where it's like our guys need to do business across state lines, and we need to be a bigger entity. And that's when we had the opportunity to meet up with the great Rand Sperry, and of course is iconic in the commercial real estate world. And Rand at the time had left Sperry Van Ness, which he created back in the 80s. And he was looking to get back into the game. He actually had a 5-year non-compete with his old partner, Mark Van Ness, and when we met him. And so we decided to team up, and we kind of did the dance for a year or two. And then we had a formal agreement and created Sperry 2.0, for lack of a better term.
Well, that's interesting because I was looking at that history thinking it was Sperry Van Ness, but now I understand that it was just Sperry. So that makes much more sense to me because I've talked to a couple brokers in the LA market and Sperry was on their resume and I didn't quite follow that story. So, but early on you worked for Marcus and Millichap. Was that your brokerage attempt, so to speak?
Well, that's where I started, and I had, I was pretty fortunate that I had some friends who were in brokerage, and they kind of steered me towards Marcus because they had the great training at the time, and and anybody will tell you, there's a lot of us ex-Marcus patriots out there. We all say the same thing. We're really, really glad that we went through that program because we did learn a lot. It's a great foundation for commercial real estate brokerage. And we just learned a lot there. And it was a different time, Bruce. Back then, we had, 80, 90, 100 brokers that would come to the office every single day. Because we didn't have technology quite that much, right? Everything was right. It was the big servers and whatnot. So it was always action. There was a lot of energy and it was a lot of fun to be a part of the industry back then. And I just learned so much in my 2.5 years there. And but then I realized, the 50-50 split is like, there's better deals out there. And like so many of us, we decided to go in a different direction and get bigger splits and keep more of the money.
Yeah, which makes perfectly logical sense. So what can you tell a young broker right now that you learned from Marcus that you would tell them, and probably you taught some of your brokers in your bigger firm, BRE, that here's how we do it?
Yeah, I mean, some things never change. And you go back 30 years, it was the same thing. It's like, look, you've got to get trained and trained properly. And a lot of the training programs, even it's not just Marcus, CB has a great training, but most of us now, this day and age, have great training programs. But the other key is to have a mentor. You're just not going to learn this business without actually doing deals, and you need to be guided. And you're not going to learn it in 2 or 3 or 4 deals. You're going to have a mentor that really walks you through the whole process because every deal is unique. And until you get that experience level, you just have to have someone who knows what they're doing. And my mentor is long retired and just a great guy. And I we meet for lunch every 6 months or so. And I always tell him, David, I owe you, I should be giving you a piece of every deal I've ever done. And he says, well, you're not as my last name. It's all righty. So, and I'm very grateful for that relationship because without it, that and the foundation of learning at Marcus, that built my foundation for commercial brokerage. And the rest is history. And from there, it's a cakewalk after that.
Well, that's so true that there are so many pitfalls in this business. And if you don't have experience, you can just fall into one of those pitfalls and kind of never come out again. Yeah. So I can see where having a mentor early on would be just so fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got thrown into the business with the Rubicon Group. You probably never heard of them, although there are several Rubicon groups out there. Anyway, they did not give me a mentor, so I had to kind of swim on my own, and that it was a lot of hard work. But eventually you get enough experience that hopefully when the pitfalls come, you can get through them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of dangerous things out there. So early on, were you making the proverbial 200 cold calls a day?
Well, it was 100 calls a day was what you had to do at Marcus back then. And, Marcus, you had a short leash. I mean, if you didn't make those 100 calls a day, they cut you loose pretty quick. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. They're kind of ruthless, but in the end, all those years later, actually, I think they were doing a lot of people a favor. I mean, we have a very high attrition rate to begin with. And a lot of this because a lot of people just don't take to cold calling. It's always tough at first, but once you break through, then it becomes almost a part of your second nature. It's kind of like exercise programs, when you really start to get in shape and you just want to keep doing it, and you realize the benefits of it. And I to this day, with all technology and all these social media and whatnot, I still tell people, no one's shown me a better way yet. You still got to get on those phones and call and talk to people because that's how you get business.
That is very interesting. So how would Marcus document the fact that you made 100 calls?
Believe it or not, they had the technology back then that
wow.
They had their little phone systems that could record the number of dials you made.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much the dials. It was like, you have your Tuesday morning, weekly call meetings, and if you didn't have activity, it just meant you weren't calling. And if you were calling and you weren't getting activity, it meant you weren't saying the right things. So
So it was very evident.
Yeah, either way, they're going to teach you. And the bottom line was, if you didn't make the calls, then you just were never going to learn what to say or what not to say. And back then, it was, my mentor was essential in terms of, every call that I had an actual conversation, we'd kind of reveal it and say, this is what you could have said, Rich. You could have said that. You could have said this. And that's the way I learned. And it was so instrumental in my ability to just take it to the next level and just learn more and more and more about the basics of the industry.
No, that's fantastic information. So what would you say your hit rate was? If you made 100 calls a day, would you get 5 good calls?
Yeah, it's all a numbers game. Still is. I mean, 80% of your calls are going to be left message. And then, you're going to have 5 or 10 or bad numbers or so that you're going to have to re-research. And then you'll have another 5 people who will just kind of just hang up on you. But then you have 4 or 5 good conversations. And that's ultimately the goal, is to, back then it was get a meeting. The reason for the phone call is to get a meeting. And back then you took a meeting with everybody for any reason. Of course, as you get older, you get a little bit more discerning in terms of which meetings you take. But back then it was just meet as many people as you can. And that's what we did. That's how we built our book of business.
Hey, did you ever go out and beat the streets?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, we used to do Thursday door knocking. In fact, whenever I had a meeting, you want to make the most of it. So wherever you had that, because if you took a meeting, you were going to miss half the day. So you would take a meeting, and then hopefully you would schedule a second meeting if you could. And if you weren't, that's when I would do door knocking. I'd figure out where I was going to go to have the meeting, and then find a few addresses in my database and go door knocking and leave business cards. And it was very effective. I mean, yes, you would, most of them were just, you'd leave your card and you'd never talk to them again. But sometimes people would say, yeah, come on in, we'll talk to you for 5 minutes.
Yeah. And then you go in and you make a quick pitch, and hopefully you get some business out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's always about just establishing and creating the relationship. And then after that, you have to just develop the relationship and become the go-to guy, become the guy that says, yeah, you know what, this guy knows his stuff. And if and when the need comes, then I do it. I mean, I used to tell a story to my young brokers about how I would talk with a guy literally every 6 months for half an hour. He used to call me and ask me and pick my brain about what's going on in the marketplace. And this went on for 7 years. And he calls me up one day and he says, hey, Rich, I'm not calling you for our usual conversation. I've got a 43-unit deal that the partnerships are breaking up. They want to sell it. Here's the price. Give me a buyer. And bam, I did the deal with them, So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't understand that brokerage is building relationships. And sometimes it takes a long time. I know I did property management for one group for, 20 years, and then finally they sold their building. So it paid off in the end, but you made a nickel and a dime throughout the 20 years with property management, but eventually the big bucks came in. So it's a tough business that way.
One more story for you. It's really quick, Bruce. So I met a guy once, because we had also had a property management group when I was the CEO of BRC, and I went out and met at a 20-unit building in LA, and a guy wanted a management company. And I went up to his building, and it was a 1960s built building, but it was immaculate condition. I'd never seen a building that old and that good a condition. And this is in the early 2000s, I guess. And I said to him, look, I'd love to manage your building. It'd be the easiest building I ever managed in my life. I said, it runs like clockwork. I said, but you've had this building for 30 years, you're out of depreciation. He says, well, as a matter of fact, Rich, we're thinking about selling. So I took my property management hat off. I put my broker hat on. And no, I did not get the property management agreement for $800 a month. But I did sell the property, and then I made a nice $60,000 commission on it. So it worked out pretty well.
A much better situation. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think so. So BRE did property management. They did leasing. They did sales. They did it all.
We did it all the asset classes. And one of the things we did back then, which was pretty novel, was we actually got our leasing people to work with our transaction people. So if you were a tenant rep or even a landlord rep for, office or retail, and you would lease that building up to 100%, then you'd go over, walk across the hall to your transaction guys and say, hey, look, I got a good relationship with my landlord, who is now a seller. And they would then team up and they would actually sell the property. So it was a really great cross-collateralization between leasing and transactions. And so the leasing guys learned how to transact, and the transaction guys learned how to lease. Because back then, Marcus and Millichap wouldn't let you do leasing.
No, which always sort of baffled me. I mean, I think they do now a little bit of leasing, but
no, they do. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to give them credit. They had their focus and they went for it. And now they've broadened their market out a little bit more. But it worked. George got very rich. George Marcus got very rich off that system. So anyway, it worked out nicely. So right during the process, you've kind of gone through all the technology phases. So what are you up to now? Are you using a CRM right now?
Sure. Yeah, I'm actually, I use RealNext, which was REA back in the day. I'm probably one of their oldest users. I've been using it since the 90s. It's a classic CRM.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's got all the bells and whistles. It's gone through all of the technological changes. And in my days in the C-suite, part of my responsibility was to make sure we had all the technological advances. So, I got a chance to look at all the different CRMs that were out there. They're all really good. There's not a lot that differentiates. Some of them have different bells and whistles, but they usually then come to adopt all of those. So all the things that you see today, pretty much all of them have it. It's a commoditized item, if you will, but absolutely necessary if you're going to be in commercial real estate brokerage. You've got to have a CRM, and it's got to be organized, and you got to be able to build that database.
Yeah. What about property management? Did you use Yardi? Did you use one of the softwares?
Yeah. So now my wife actually ended up being staying on the property management side. She's got her own property management, asset management group, and she oversees about 3,000 units here in Southern California. She used Yardi for years, and I believe she's using AppFolio now. And Yardi's gone through a lot of changes. Still a great program, but she prefers the bells and whistles of AppFolio, and she's happy with that. But Yardi purchased a program called Pierce Iceland, which you maybe recall.
I don't recall that one.
Pierce and Iceland were two brokers, old school guys that I think they were Cushman & Wakefield guys, and they built a database, and they ended up, building it so well that Yardi eventually bought it. Now it's called Yardi Matrix. And if you're in the multifamily space, you're familiar with Yardi Matrix. That was formerly Pierce Iceland. It is a phenomenal program. It really is. They did an amazing job with it. It's a great database program.
So AppFolio doesn't have that kind of database side.
No, AppFolio is strictly property management. It has all the bells and whistles for property management. It doesn't have nothing to do with brokerage. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to see how software has changed the whole world of real estate. I mean, CoStar and LoopNet, what do you think about that?
Well, CoStar is still a de facto standard. You have to have it if you're going to be a serious player in the industry. Yeah. When CoStar bought LoopNet, they just gutted it. I mean, LoopNet is not nearly what it used to be. It used to be the graveyard of listings. If you couldn't sell your listing on your own, you'd put it on LoopNet, right? And then what CoStar did, they just and now it's mostly a leasing platform, although it does have transactions on there. I actually haven't put anything on LoopNet in years. There's just not really a need to. In this day and age, when you have so many other technologies out there that you can use to market your properties. So what if you're selling a building? What do you typically do? Nowadays with me, it's about relationships. It's about just I have a phenomenal database. So if I get a deal, if it's an off market or even if I list it, I kind of know who my buyers are. I listed a 225 unit building earlier this year, and I ended up getting 18 offers. But I just knew who the buyers were going to be. I really didn't do a whole lot of marketing on it because I just got it out to all my guys, and they're all players in the LA market, and we got the deal sold. So when you have a strong database, it goes a long way, and I've kind of expanded my purview to more on a national side. So because a lot of folks here in California want to reallocate their capital to Texas and Florida, so I've really expanded my database out there, and I'm talking to a lot of folks in Texas, and especially Texas and Florida, and a lot of money's moving out there. 30% of the owners in Dallas are California-based buyers.
Wow. So you're doing a lot of 1031 exchanges. A
lot of exchanges, still very, very popular. In fact, I just put out an email blast for a client who's in a $30 million exchange right now, and I've gotten a ton of responses, which is really good because, again, same thing. They're looking to reallocate that capital out of California.
Yeah. So going into strictly triple nets?
No, they're institutional investors, so they're still very much in the multifamily space. That's their bread and butter. Obviously, when you get out of California, you don't have the rent control restrictions that you have. Certainly Texas and Florida are really good. Both, of course, are non-income tax states, so their property taxes are a little bit higher, but they just seem to be a better bang for your buck in those areas. And that's why you have a lot of California buyers, putting their money in Texas and Florida. Have you ever worked in the crazy affordable housing world? Believe it or not, I've actually kind of just entered into that almost by accident. I'm actually putting together a JV between an affordable housing player and 152 units in Long Beach. And it's fascinating. It's an interesting capital stack. I can't sit here and say by any means that I'm an expert at it. But given the housing crisis that we have here in Los Angeles and all across the country, this is the hot topic. You're certainly going to be on, you're going to get a lot of government cooperation if it's affordable. And so it's really interesting. And given the fact that we've had so many issues with financing, with the interest rate issues that we've had over the last few years, the affordable is really an interesting market niche. And it's definitely something I kind of like doing. Just, it's a good thing. You're building housing for folks, and the misconception is that it's Section 8 or that it's not. It's professionals, it's teachers, it's cops, it's firemen, it's nurses, who can't afford $3,000 and $4,000 a month in rent for a lousy little studio apartment. So I really like that affordable space, and I'm getting into it more and more and learning more and more about it. And for lack of a better term too, I want to do something good before I call it quits.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So is this one of these bond situations where the city floats a bond for buying the affordable unit?
There's a number of different models, but certainly the tax-exempt status, the tax-exempt bonds are a big part of it. But there's a whole host of different affordable models out there. There's 60% EMI, 80%, so on and so forth. So it really depends on the individual asset, where it's at, where it fits in terms of the average median income and how that it pencils out. It's really fascinating stuff. And there's actually very little equity, and it's more on the capital stack side to build the tax procurements and the tax equities and the taxes issues so that you can get the tax abatements on the property tax, which is the largest expense of any commercial real estate asset. And if that's waived as a result of being an affordable, that's just a huge number that goes right to the bottom line NOI.
No, it's a fantastic market. You'll have to go back and listen to Jeremy Hoffman's podcast that I did. He's a consultant in that space, and he's actually helping us build 50 units of senior affordable housing here.
Nice.
So anyway, it is a crazy, wild world, but once you kind of get used to it a little bit and the tax credits and so forth, it's a very interesting opportunity. So.
No, I totally agree. It really is. It's fascinating. Look, you always teach an old dog new tricks, and I have a great understanding of your traditional financing. Your CMBS and even more sophisticated financing. But this is a whole new world of that capital stack, and I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting, very complicated world, and sometimes it takes forever. But once you get there, it's very rewarding. So anyway, well. How would people get a hold of you, Rich?
Well, my email is rich.enderlin8259@gmail.com. And there's a story there, Bruce, with that 8259 for you one day. We'll talk off camera. But my phone number is 213-610-6216. And I'm happy to talk to anybody in the industry. If you're new and you want some advice, I'm happy to do it at this stage of my career.
That would be great. Well, I think for those younger listeners out there that are either thinking of getting in commercial brokerage or are already in and need a little advice, I think Rich is your man. But also, if you happen to have a property you want to sell, I think you need to talk to Rich for sure.
Especially if it's off market. I've got a number of California institutional investors that, again, especially if it's out of state, if it's in Arizona, Texas, Florida, my California guys love those three places.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Bruce, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate all your patience with me in terms of getting this finally done.
Well, some things, good things take a little longer.
Absolutely.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Bruce. Take care.
That's a wrap on today's journey through the SF commercial real estate scene. Ready to share your story? Visit sfcommercialconversations.com/guest. Your insights could lead the next conversation.